All right. So, Jidan, could you help me out here? So I want to get this challenge started. What's the first thing I need to do? So I went to Quebec Platoon, went to algo def grandma. What's the first thing I need to do here?
Yes, so I think the first thing is that I would try to fork it to the IDE, the VS Code.
Yep. So yeah, the first thing we want to do is fork it. In this case, we want to fork it to our personal GitHub. So if I click fork, I'm going to select my personal GitHub. I have a bunch of organizations, but Encore CP is my personal one. So it's going to take like maybe 5 seconds. Doesn't take too long. So forking, again, just gives you basically a copy, essentially a copy on your personal GitHub so that you can modify it. We don't allow you guys to modify the Quebec Platoon repository for many reasons. But now it's my personal GitHub. I could change this as much as I want. All right, cool. Thanks, Jidan. All right, Edgar, can you tell me what I should do next? I'm not sure if you're muted, maybe.
Okay, so you haven't copied the code yet, right?
Nope, this is only on my GitHub. How do I get it down to my machine?
Okay, well, first do you have the, so first I'd open the terminal.
Okay, got a terminal right here.
And then do you have it, I'm not sure if you need a folder for the problem or if you could just directly copy the link into the challenges folder.
Yep, so you can grab the link from this code button. So I'm going to grab the link here.
So you grab the link and then you clone it with git clone and then the link.
Yep, excellent. Yep, so we do git clone. If you don't specify a folder name, it's going to automatically create a folder called algo def grandma in this case. If you do want to specify a folder, you can add additional name here, but in this case, I don't do it. I don't want to change the name of this folder. So just going to enter here.
Okay.
That's going to clone it down. Yep, thanks, Edgar. All right, so we're getting our steps down. Okay, cool. So I got this on my machine. Now I want to bring this up in a VS Code editor. So I'm going to do a CD into that folder. Again, a quick shortcut is if you're starting to type something, you hit the tab button, and it's going to autofill as much as it can. In this case, I don't have any other challenges in this folder, I bet. So it knows exactly what folder I want to go to. But let's say I had multiple folders that started with algo. Well, it's going to fill it up, like it's going to fill in the text up to as much as it can. And then it's going to ask me to kind of type more to distinguish what I'm trying to get to. In this case, I want to CD into that, which gets me into that folder. And then I want to open a VS Code. So if you set up all your system paths correctly, you can type code and period. That's going to open this folder as your workspace and should launch a new VS Code window. So if I do this, hopefully I get a new VS Code. Jake, you have a question there?
Yeah. I just wanted to double check. I read somewhere that in our home folder, we're supposed to have a projects folder. And is that where all of this stuff is supposed to be going, in the projects folder? Or so when we clone, we want to be inside the projects folder?
Yeah, so this is what we recommend, but it's up to you how you want to kind of manage your files. So the way I manage my files, I guess I don't have it there. Have that there. Let me bring that up. So I simply have, let me just bring up my hard drive. All right, so this is my Mac hard drive. I have on my desktop, I have a link, I guess that's the pop-up, but let's go back to, I have a folder called code. So this is in my user is Code Platoon. So in my user space, I have a folder called code. Within that, I have a bunch of subfolders, one for the past cohort, one for this cohort. So within that, I have a challenges folder. So again, this is how I choose to organize it. Again, you can choose how to organize it differently, but I highly recommend having one central folder for all your challenges. Like right now, there's not much for my challenges. I have 2 in here. So I went back to like Pop-Up Platoon. You know, I have, I guess I deleted those. But yeah, usually I'll have all my challenges kind of centralized. I wonder if I have these. Looks like I delete my files because I'm short on space, but yeah, I just have one folder with every challenge that I've kind of tackled. So it's a good way to kind of have quick access to it. Yeah, your GitHub has all the challenges stored, but I get to have a copy of all of them just in case you need to reference them. Yeah, it's just, again, however you feel like you can best organize your files, definitely have something in place. Don't just save them randomly on your hard drive because that's going to make it hard to find. Okay. All right, so I have my VS Code open. notice that it's open in that folder. So I have the files, I have defgramma.js, defgramma Python. We're not going to be coding in Python today. We're going to be learning about Python tomorrow. But we have our README file. So let's take our README. Again, my preference, I prefer reading the README on the web. So let's take a look at the premise here. So we want to write a program that can imitate a grandma who's hard of hearing and follows these constraints. So this is how your grandma responds to you based on how you address your grandma. So if you don't input anything, so you kind of just say nothing, she responds with what. So specifically, there should be a string that's outputted that says what. If you ask a question with any lowercase letters, she responds, speak up, kid. Because again, she's hard of hearing. You need to write in caps, simulating that you're kind of yelling at her or speaking loudly. If you talk to her in all uppercase, she responds with, nope, not since 1946. The first time, so this is where several students mentioned the counter, where that comes in play. The first time you mention goodbye in caps, she should ask, leaving so soon. Only after the first time, if you say goodbye again, she'll say later, skater, as in that will kind of quit your conversation with her and should quit your application. All right, so this is what we're trying to implement. Here's an example of what the flow should be. So it seems like grandma starts out with, hey kid, you say something in lowercase, she'll say speak up. Again, that's just an example. Python, we're not going to be doing anything in Python. In JavaScript, that's our challenge for today. All right, and the challenge here was using regular expressions. We're going to be learning about regular expressions later on. So if you're not familiar with them, don't worry, we'll go over regex at a later date. All right, so let's get to this challenge. I'm going to look at my index.html. This is how we kind of allow our browser to use JavaScript. We create a simple HTML file. We have a script tag that links to our JavaScript. So again, this allows our browser to run our JavaScript file here. So if I look at the defgramma JavaScript file, notice that there's some initial code there, but there's no logic in here. We basically call our function, and our function currently has nothing that it's doing. So that is our task here, is to implement this function. So add logic here. Okay, so to get this started, let's try to game plan this. So we need some way of, I'm going to write some comments here. So just to kind of game plan or pseudocode this, we need a way to get user input. We need to analyze the inputs and react appropriately. So if we remember, our constraints were lowercase should be one case. Another case was if you say goodbye. Or other cases. I think if we say something in caps, normal question, all caps. That's another case. I guess goodbye can be first and second time. There's two different cases there. Do we forget any case here? So
if you don't say anything or you just press enter.
Thank you. Yep. Forgot about that case. So we also have say nothing. Okay, so that hopefully covers our basis. Say nothing, lowercase, uppercase, goodbye, and goodbye. All right, so those are our cases we need to consider. So our analyzing should determine, which case is going to be hit, and then respond appropriately. So we'll add that in later. All right, so let's. I think that's a good starting point. We know kind of what things we need to tackle. We have a list of items, so we can kind of check them off. Okay, let's get to it. So we have function defgramma, and looking at this, it seems like our grandma is going to say, hey kid, to start off. So maybe we can put an alert. I'm going to use some alerts here. So alert, we'll say, hey kid. And I just want to see this like starting. I want to make sure my browser is running correctly. So I'm actually just going to run this with this alert. And hopefully if everything's wired correctly, we should see, once we load the browser, we should see an alert that says, hey kid. If not, then we might need to check our index.html or defgramma. We're going to launch this via live server. That's one of the extensions that hopefully everyone installed yesterday. This should bring up my index.html. Came up on my other window here. All right, so this is the browser that popped up, and notice we get a message saying, "Hey kid." So that's totally what I expected. I'm gonna slide this over to a new window. All right, so this is our browser that's running our JavaScript code. Okay, so with that, okay, so now nothing else happens because there's no other logic that needs to happen. Okay, so that looks like it's working correctly. So that's the beginning of our conversation. So begin conversation. All right, so now we should have the opportunity to respond to our grandmother. So looking at the README file, we had, oops, it's coming up. All right, I'm just gonna kill this browser. Okay, so the hint here, or the suggestion here, was you can use window.prompt to get some user input. So let's test that out quickly. So I'm just gonna add a quick window.prompt here. Window.prompt. And you can put this as a prompt. Let's see what that looks like. My web server. Okay, so we got our alerts. Those kind of get annoying, so maybe we'll try to figure out. If I click OK, notice we get another message. Now this is where we could add some user input. So I could type in anything I want, but probably want to add something that's useful. So this should be our input mechanism as we're responding to our grandmother. Okay, cool. So right now I'm just gonna hit cancel. Okay, comment that out for now. So let's just put a prompt here. This wasn't specified, but I'm just gonna say respond to friend. Okay, so that's how we're gonna respond to her. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is that this is not just a one question, one answer. This conversation can go on pretty much. It could go on for like infinity, right? It can go on forever if we don't abandon the conversation based on saying goodbye. So this is a good time to talk about when to use a for loop versus when to use a while loop. Now, both can achieve the same thing. So we have while loops, if you guys are familiar with that. And we also have for loops, right? Hopefully we've encountered both of these. A common question, or maybe a self question is, well, when do I use a for loop versus when do we use a while loop? The real answer is you can use either. They're gonna allow you to achieve the same thing, assuming you do things correctly. However, my recommendation is you want to use a while loop when you don't know how many loops you need to do, versus a for loop. Like if you're iterating through an array, you should know the length of the array, so you know exactly when you know how many iterations / loops you need to do. Right, so that's my general rule of thumb is if I know exactly how many iterations I need to do up front, I will opt to use a for loop. If I don't know, in this case, I don't know, right? We could keep conversing with our grandma for like 10, 20 questions. So that's why I'm going to opt to use a while loop, because we don't know how long this conversation is going to go for. So I'm going to implement a while loop here, but we need a condition. So this while loop is going to run so long as this condition that I put here is going to be true. So maybe let's create a variable. Let's say continue conversation is one way to call mine. We're going to set that to true. All right, so that's going to be my condition that when that becomes false, we'll kind of get out of our loop here. So continuing conversation is true initially. We're going to get into this loop and we're going to do a Q&A with our grandma. So I think we should put our prompt inside that loop because every exchange is going to require a prompt, and that should give us back the value. So let's say I don't know how this window.prompt item works. Googling is something that every developer does. So sometimes I know students kind of feel bad, like, hey, I'm Googling everything. Is that okay? Yes, that's totally fine. It's not about knowing everything. It's knowing how to find the answers for what you're looking for and understand the answers. Again, not just finding the answers, but understanding what you're looking for. So in this case, I'm going to do a quick Google. Go to my good old friend Google. All right, I need to stop my left server. This is where the alerts get annoying. All right, server's down. I think it's down. Okay, so let's do a quick Google for window.prompt. Okay, so Mozilla is a great resource for documentation. So this, I'm not sure if this is the official documentation for JavaScript, but it is pretty official in my mind. So here it looks like we call window.prompt. We have a message. It looks like we could provide an optional parameter. So notice that both of these are optional. But if we want a default input, we could specify that as a second parameter. We'll talk more about option parameters later on today when we kind of go over our JavaScript intro. But for now, it looks like I can get a result back, and that's going to be a string containing the text entered by the user, or null. Maybe null if they don't enter anything. But okay, cool. So they have an example. So again, reading documentation, that's going to be half the battle for us as new developers. It's not the most fun thing to read documentation, but that's the best way to kind of learn about the functions we're going to be using. So okay, cool. So it looks like I can type, I could get a return value here. So let's say let response equals whatever I type in to this prompt, I should get that back as my response. And then let's try kind of handling these cases. So since I need to make some decisions, I think an if statement or a series of if statements might be best here. So, if we have if response as lowercase, we'll do that. Let's actually copy these down here. All right, so let's go through these cases and make sure we handle all of them. So if we say nothing, so if response is empty string, or maybe it's null, I actually need to double check that. So if it's empty string, we need to do one thing. So in this case, grandma's response, so let's say, I'm going to call this input instead, inputs. And then we'll create a response variable for grandma responding. So let response equal empty string. So grandma would respond with, forget already, go back to here. So we have what? I'm just gonna copy that so I don't mistype it. All right, so that is what grandma responds with. So we set that equal to response. All right, so that should handle our say nothing case. And then obviously grandma should respond with that. So I'm gonna put an alert at the very bottom with the response. Now, the reason I'm putting it at the bottom is because response is gonna be changing, or it's gonna be dependent on what our input was. So instead of putting this alert in here, which I can, but each branch of my, like if I have an else if here, and I do something else, well, this is gonna also want to respond, right? Because grandma always responds no matter what you say. She's gonna say something different each time. But in this case, I don't want my alerts kind of in each if statement, because that's going to be redundant code. It can work, but it's not going to be, again, the cleanest code. So I'm going to pull this out, put this at the very bottom so that these if statements will get us a response. And then at the very end, we'll send out one central place to send out the response from the grandma. Any questions about anything we've covered up so far?
Yeah, I have a quick question.
Go for it.
For the window.prompt, so the default response or the default argument that you can put in would serve as a response if they just hit enter?
Yeah, so it's kind of like pre-fills that, it'll pre-fill that input box. If we just say, hello as our default, then the prompt will have hello as a default. So yeah, we can have that in there.
Okay. So
yeah,
it'll have it filled in already, like when it pops up, it'll already say hello in the text box field?
Yep, I believe so. We could definitely check that out. So yeah, let's set a default value. Not that we had to, but let's try that. All right, so now we want to do lowercase. So if input, let's do Google here. So lower check for lowercase JavaScript. Googling, always good skill. All right, so Stack Overflow, another great resource. This is where developers ask questions and respond. So again, it's totally okay to use Stack Overflow. Again, make sure you understand anytime you're copying code. This is something I want to reiterate right now, and I'll probably say it throughout the cohort. It's okay to copy code, like reference code that you find on our curriculum pages or on like other resources like Stack Overflow, but do not copy code without understanding it. That's a cardinal sin of development in terms of if you're just copying code and expecting it to work, well, it may work, but you're not really learning. You're just learning how to copy and paste, and that's not what we're trying to teach here. So definitely, you get to Stack Overflow, try to understand the code. If you don't understand it, definitely reach out and say, hey, I see that this is the solution, but I don't quite understand why that's the solution. right, so in this case, we want to see how can I test if the letter in a string is uppercase or lowercase. Looks like there are some 2 uppercase, 2 lowercase functions that we might be want to use. We can use regular expressions also, but since we're not too familiar with that, we can maybe hold off on that. How else can we do? Check if string contains. I know there's like includes or contains folder. All right, Stack Overflow. What do you got for us? So it looks like we write a helper function that could be useful. So here we could have has lowercase, pass in string. All right, so that's a cool way to do it. We can convert the string to uppercase and see if it matches itself. If it does match itself, well then, okay, then we know it's uppercase to begin with. If it doesn't match itself, then we know something in the original string was not uppercase. So I think that's a cool way to do it. Again, there's several ways to do this. Again, regex is one way. We can come up with other solutions also, but I'm going to go with that suggestion because I think that makes sense to me. So do input dot to uppercase equal input. So this is saying if the uppercase version is the same as the original input, that means we can automatically know that the original was already uppercase to begin with. One thing to keep in mind here, and this goes back to reading documentation. This function is not actually modifying my input. This is actually creating a brand new string for me, and I'm comparing that with my original. So some methods will modify your original data. And it's important to know which methods do and which methods don't. And then the question you might have in the back of your mind is like, well, how do I know? Well, one way is you could test it out. The second way is reading documentation. Documentation will mention if it actually modifies the original value or if it does not. All right, so in this case, I am not modifying my original value, but I want to check if it's lowercase. So I guess I want to check if it has lowercase, which probably do a not equals. And then in this case, grandma will respond with, I believe it's speak up kid. Where'd my challenge go? Speak up kid. Okay, so that should be the response. If we detect any lowercase letters, grandma's going to respond with that. Okay, that handles the lowercase case. Let's go with the normal question. This is our typical case, so I'll put that next. So if we have another else if, else if. Okay, else if, assuming everything is fine, we can go into this branch. And I guess this branch could also incorporate the goodbye. We'll have to think about that. But else we get a normal response. Let's make them else. Grandma's going to respond with not since, what is it, 1946. All right, so it's going to copy that. All right, so again, any other question that is uppercase, that is non-blank and uppercase, that's going to respond with this message. But we also have this goodbye case. That's the only other special case that we have left. So we can kind of handle that here. Because assuming that we get through this branch and this branch, we know that something was inputted and we know it's uppercase. So we need to check uppercase first so that we can kind of know that if we get to this else branch, that we already know it's going to be uppercase and valid as a non-empty. Any questions so far? Please don't hesitate to ask if we've lost.
Yeah, I have 2 questions.
Go for it.
So first, what's the difference between, because you have a input to uppercase with 2 equal signs instead of just 1, and I had just 1. What's the difference between the 2? Excellent
question. Yeah, so we'll cover that, but let's yeah, we can definitely answer that right now. So there's different ways you can compare objects. There's in JavaScript. So this is specific to JavaScript. We're gonna be learning Python tomorrow. This concept does not exist in Python with triple equals and double equals. So double equals in JavaScript means do a comparison with coercion. I'm terrible at spelling. Coercion. All right, I did not spell that correctly. Compare. Let's just say compare.
It's a C.
With coercion, and this
Coercion.
is, what was it? Is it?
I think it's a C instead of an S.
Okay.
That's how you spell it. If it's that word, I don't know if it's the same word.
Ah, you got it right. Thanks.
Yeah.
Compare without coercion. I did not win my spelling bees, so I think it's probably up in here. But okay, so these two are different in that if you're comparing things like, if you're comparing the value of 0 with string 0, in this case, JavaScript with double equal signs will convert one of these to match the other type. So the numeric
Okay.
0 and string value 0, this will be equal if you use double equals. With triple equals, this same comparison will be false. So
So
that would be false in this case, and this would be
Yeah.
true.
what is coercion? in
Coercion is where
JavaScript?
you kind of just like, where JavaScript automatically converts one value to another type. So in this case,
Yeah.
again, it's going to take a string and an integer and say, okay, I'm going to convert maybe the string to an integer, and then I'm going to compare those values. With triple equals, it will not automatically convert these. So it's going to say, hey, wait, this is an integer, this is a string, therefore this comparison is going to be false. So triple equals is more stricter. It's not going to allow JavaScript to automatically convert between types.
Okay, good. And then
So to fully answer the question, when you do a not, this is just doing the opposite of it. So now this is going to say, the opposite of whatever the equal, triple equals would be, it take the negation.
Yeah.
of that.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you for explaining that. And
Thank
then my second question is, so do you have to do the alert? Because I think in window.prompt, like if you do window.prompt again, you could type in a response, like where you wrote response to grandma, you could type in like goodbye or the leaving so soon.
Yep.
And I don't know if that's allowed or if that's wrong.
Nope, that totally sounds okay to me. So yeah, for a lot of these challenges, we're not going to specify exactly what you need to do. So some of it's going to be, to your creative liberties. So yeah, that totally makes sense if you want to use the prompt to kind of, I wrote respond to grandma here, but you can write what she responds with. That makes sense to me. It just cuts out some additional prompts. So no, yeah, definitely have some flexibility there. There's not one way that we're looking for everything. Yep, Jen, you have a question?
Oh, yeah. So for line 24, for the .2 uppercase there.
Yep.
So are we comparing a modified string to our original value string? Right?
Yes, in a sense, what this is doing is creating a temporary value. So I could write this as, if I want to create a new variable, I could say let upper input equals input to uppercase. So right here, I'm creating like a temporary variable. This is not modifying my original input. It's just like a new value that gets created on the spot and then disappears after this comparison. So if I want to do it this way, I could, but that, I'm not going to use the uppercase value at any point after this. So, this would work. That's one way to do it. But in this case, I'm kind of just doing it in line. Again, creating a variable and it gets destroyed on the same line. Andrew, you have
Gotcha.
My question has to do with the if and else if statements.
Sure.
So a lot of times when I'm doing these type of problems, I just keep chaining like the if statements. Can you explain why you would use if or else if?
So if I understand the question correctly, are you saying you put an if like right here?
No, like not within it, but like where you have your else if, maybe I would like put if right after.
Like right here?
Yeah, like because I've seen like, and it works a lot of the time too. I'm just wondering like why you would use one or the other.
Absolutely. So it comes down to, again, what you need to achieve. Now, having two ifs here is a different logical process than what if I have else if here. So to make sure we understand the difference, when you have a series of if and else ifs, that means only one of these branches is going to be hit. So I'll either get into this part right here, as in this response, or I'll get into this. There's no way that both of these can happen. However, if you separate out ifs, as you mentioned, there's a potential based on the condition for both of these to be hit. So if this were true and this were true, I'll get into this if statement, and then I'll also get into this if statement, basically overwriting what I just did here. But with an else if, that's guaranteeing that this will be checked first. If that happens to be true, I'll never even evaluate this part of my code. So the else if is just like, okay, well, the first part was not true. Let me try to do this part. If you have two separate ifs, it's going to be, they're totally independent and they could both, wind up getting into their if bodies, or they might ignore it. The else case for an if else if chain is if none of these above were true, then this is kind of like the catch-all or catch everything else. Yep. So again, both are valid structures. It depends on, hey, do you need both if statements to be hit? If the answer is yes, then make them separate. If you need them to be kind of dependent on one another, then you want to go for else ifs. Porfi, you got a question?
Yeah, thank you. So two questions actually. So the else is like just tells in JavaScript to have like an implicit break after the whatever previous if statements are held as true.
Yeah, I guess that's one that's one good way to think about it. Yeah, so it's basically the else is saying it's like a break. Yes. So if we get into one of these statements, then all these else's are ignored. It drops out of this entire block because it knows that it hit one of these branches. The else will be ignored in these cases.
Gotcha. And then the second one was I didn't see anything something for non-letter inputs. So like if the question has a number in it, like how will JavaScript do this method with the two uppercase?
Great question. Yeah, so again, this might come to like trial and error or reading documentation. My understanding of two uppercase is that it's only going to modify text or A through Z letters. So anything that's punctuation or numbers, though, that's not going to be modified by two uppercase. Like a 4, there's no uppercase 4 or lowercase 4. So in that case, this won't modify those characters. It only modifies lowercase and makes them uppercase for our new string that's being created.
Thank you.
Yep. Jesse, you have a question?
Yes. I just had a quick question on line 24.
Yeah.
I just on line 24, does it matter if it's switched, like you got input does not equal input dot to uppercase? Does it matter on either one?
Great question. Nope. In this case, comparisons are reflexive, as in you can compare left and right or right and left. So yeah, the direction for equality does not matter. Now, obviously, if this were not equality, if we did something like less than, obviously the sides matter there, but you can't really do less than with strings. But yeah, for equality comparisons, you can kind of swap left and right and it will work just fine.
Okay.
Yep. Elin?
Hi, Anchor. Just want to clarify. You're saying if there's two separate if statements,
Yep.
If both of the conditions are true, is it going to display like both of the return variable, or the second one will override the first one?
The way I've coded it right now, the second one will overwrite the first one because I'm basically reassigning because I have an equal sign here. However, if I change this to be a plus equals, which you can do with strings, this would actually append this. So I'll get like a what and a speak up kid if I'm kind of building up my string. But currently I'm just assigning over my string. So yeah, if I had two separate if statements, this would get assigned and then this will get assigned. So the first value kind of just gets blown away.
Thank
you. Yep. Jim, do you still have a question or is that hand from a previous?
Oh, sorry, I did not have to undo.
No problem. All right, cool. Let's continue on here. So we need to handle the goodbye case. And notice, if you remember, there's the first time we say goodbye, grandma responds with one thing. If we say it again, we will get to kind of get out of our conversation with her. So let's check. Let's add a case up here, I guess. So we'll add another else if. Else if inputs equal goodbye. All right, so we're going to handle our goodbye case right here. So again, the first time she says, we say goodbye, she's going to respond with leaving so soon. So that's going to be a response here. But now how do we actually accomplish, again, keeping track of how many times we said goodbye? Well, this is where I think some of the students mentioned we might need a counter. So right now I have a continue conversation counter set to true. I'm thinking, what if I change this to goodbye counter? And we're going to set that to 0 initially. So my condition now is going to be changed to goodbye counter. Again, I'm just renaming my variable to make it clear what I'm tracking. I'm going to set that less than equal to 1. So again, what my while loop is saying right now is continue talking to grandma so long as we haven't said goodbye more than once. All right, so we say goodbye here, and then the counter is going to be increased every time we say goodbye. The counter value should go up. So if we get into this part of our code, we should always increment our goodbye counter. So goodbye counter equals goodbye counter plus 1. If you guys are familiar with the shorthand of this, we could do goodbye counter plus plus. Both of these lines are doing the same exact thing. First one is adding 1 to the value and then reassigning it. This is doing the same thing. It's just a quicker way to write it. So hopefully you guys are familiar with that syntax. I'll leave the kind of more verbose syntax here just so that we're all clear on it. We add to our counter, and then we could check our counter value. So we're going to be at 0. If we get to anything that's greater than 2, so we say if goodbye counter is greater than 1, the response should be something else. It should be catch you later, skater, or something. Later, skater. All right, copy that. Put that over here. Okay, so that's, again, if we hit that condition of we've said goodbye more than once, grandma's gonna let us kind of get out of this conversation. Else, she'll ask, leaving so soon. All right, but in either case, we need to update our counter. So that is why that's outside of if else here. Let me add some spacing here so we can make it easier to read. But then we actually check what condition we're getting to. This is, we've said goodbye once before. This is the first time we're saying goodbye. All right. So again, I'm piecing this together. Obviously, I should be testing this. So we're gonna get into testing shortly. Okay, so we have our input. We have our grandma's response here. We fill in the appropriate response based on our input. And then at the very end, grandma should respond. Question is, how do we get out of this conversation? Well, as I mentioned, I'm keeping track of how many times we've said goodbye. If ever the value of goodbye counter gets to be greater than 1, so again, the opposite of this will become false. So if goodbye counter is like 7, if somehow we can get up to 7, this would be false, and then this we're no longer keep looping. So that is our exit condition. Any questions about how I've kind of set up my loop here and how it's going to continue or how it's going to kind of quit here? Again, I still need to test this out, so I'm not 100% sure if it's going to work, but I think these are the pieces we need. John, you have a question?
So the goodbye counter, wouldn't it be greater than or equal to 1 for the later skater?
Well, so let's think about it. It's good question, because again, those edge cases always good to keep that in mind. So initially we start with goodbye counter at 0. If we say goodbye for the first time, we're going to add to our counter. And so the counter value is going to be 1. And so that should hit this case right here, right? Because that's the first time we said it.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Yep. Again, it does matter when you increment this. Like if I had moved this down to be after all this, well then yes, I would need to change some logic up here. But yeah, good question. Again, those edge cases can be tricky, so always good to give them a second thought. Megan, you have a question?
I just have a question about the window.prompt again.
Sure.
If you were to leave the parentheses empty, would it still work the same?
Yeah, so if we remember our documentation, which I lost here, both those parameters were optional, as in you can pass in nothing to that function and it just still works. It's probably just gonna be a window with no text in it and just an input box. And yeah, that should be fine too. So yeah, these are optional. So if we don't want to display any text to the user, we don't have to. Yeah, we'll talk about optional parameters later on this morning. Yilin, you have a question?
Yes. This might be a basic question. So will it affect the final output if we put the initial input and response variable outside the while loop?
Sorry, could you ask that again?
So will it affect the function's final output if we put those two variables outside the while loop?
Oh, you mean if I declare input here?
Yes.
And also response?
Yes.
I think in this case, we should be fine. So it's probably actually better to declare them here, so we don't have to keep recreating the variable. It's probably a good suggestion.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, this
Just wanted to
should
make
work just fine. Basically, we're saying, hey, these variables, we create them once outside the loop. We update them each time here. The benefit of this, again, is that we don't have to keep recreating a variable every time we do a while loop. That's a small efficiency gain. I know we're not too focused on like, writing super efficient code at this point, but always good to be mindful of, yeah, if we don't need to recreate those variables each time, we could definitely get away without doing that.
Thank you.
Good question. Yep, glad you mentioned that. Okay, cool. So with this in place, I think I have a good initial attempt. Again, always be mindful of testing your code. I've never met a developer that writes 100% perfect code every time. So, you might think it works, but always make sure you test your code. So here, I think this looks good to me, but let's test it out here. So I'm going to launch my index.html. I should bring up our good old window here. I'll move that to a new desktop. Okay, so I'll make this larger. Can you guys read my screen here? I don't know if the font's too small. Good. Okay. All right, I'm going to assume you guys can read the prompts then.
Yeah, it's good.
All right, thanks. All right, so respond to grandma. So notice that the default is hello. That is because we chose to put in a default value for window.prompt. Again, this was optional. We just tried it out. So yep, to answer that question, looks like there's a default value here. But let's respond to grandma. Let's actually respond with hello. Sure, we're meeting grandma for the first time, so I'm going to hit OK. So notice we get speak up kid. Now, is that what we expected? Well, let's take a look. So when we say something with lowercase, we had hello in lowercase, we should expect speak up kid to be responded with. So that's what we got. Okay, so that looks like that case works correctly. All right, we got to respond to grandma. Let's put in nothing. Let's just say we show up, we didn't say anything. Grandma thinks we said something, so let's hit OK. Yep, we got that what statement, meaning grandma thought we said something, but we didn't actually say something. All right, so again, this conversation continues. Let's actually say something that she can hear. So let's put in happy Tuesday, grandma. Okay, so we're going to say happy Tuesday, grandma. So again, this is all uppercase. So let's actually validate what we think should happen. We're not saying goodbye, so it's not going to hit this case. So it's going to drop down all the way down to this else case because none of these if statements were true. So the else will handle everything else. So we should get a response of no, not since 1946. Let's verify that by hitting OK. All right, awesome. That looked good. What if we have a mix of uppercase and lowercase? So we say hello with lowercase O's, maybe some lowercase L's. So we have some uppercase. Again, good to test various conditions. Yep, that's what I expected because we had any single lowercase. Grandma should ask us to speak up. All right, let's try the goodbye thing. So if we do goodbye lowercase, yep, that should be speak up kid because we need to write in uppercase. Or if we write goodbye in uppercase, do we have an exclamation mark? Yeah, okay. Just want to make sure I got that correct. Yep, goodbye with exclamation mark. So hit OK, exclamation mark. All right, yep, the first time we say goodbye, grandma should ask leaving so soon. Then I hit OK. Let's continue our conversation. So if we say, how are you? Okay, we get that. That's the default response for any valid question. Let's say goodbye again now. Goodbye, exclamation. All right, so now we get to depart our conversation there. So that's the second time we say goodbye. Now I want to make sure we read our requirements correctly. Yeah, so second time, again, the second time does not have to be right after the first time. That's the way I'm interpreting the directions here. You might have interpreted it differently. That's totally fine, so long as you met your objectives, what you thought were the requirements. But in this case, you can say goodbye halfway through the conversation, continue conversation, and then if you say goodbye again, that's when grandma will say later skater, and I hit OK. Notice our program no longer continues, so we basically exit our application here. So I think we met all of our objectives. Again, we handle every case. We are able to exit out of the conversation. I think this is a working solution. Again, might want to test a little bit more with like some fringe cases. Like what if we put all spaces? What might happen there? But I think for now, we're good with this solution. All right, any questions on how we chose to solve this? Again, you might have done different ways. I know some students use regex, regular expressions, totally valid. Glad you guys are kind of understanding how to use regular expressions, but definitely multiple ways to solve this. So if you did it a different way, but still solved it, kudos to you.
Hey, Ankur, to start the conversation, she's supposed to say, "Hey kid." Where would you put that in here for the initial
Oh,
"Hey kid," where she says, where basically she starts the conversation with you?
right. Yeah, I forgot. Yeah, so I think I'll just have an alert because I think we automatically drop into conversation with her. So to say, "Hey kid," right here. So this will be the first thing that gets done even before my while loop. Because again, we don't want to say "Hey kid" every time. We just want to say it once. So yeah, I guess, start convo. So yeah, I probably put it there. So we get prompted with "Hey kid" when we launch this, and then we'll dive into our conversation.
Hey, Ankur, I had a question about the test scenarios.
Sure.
Since the way this is written is with like alerts and prompts, does it have to be tested in the browser, or is there a way you could also test it in the terminal using Node, since it uses like alert and prompts?
Yes. So full disclosure here. So the backstory is this challenge used to be slightly different for past cohorts, where we asked students to do this in Node. The tricky part with that is that Node does not have an input mechanism. So that's through the terminal. Node does not have a way to do that right off the bat. So we actually had to install a separate library to kind of get that functionality. So it is possible using Node, but right now we're using the browser just to have an easy way to have an input mechanism for the user. So I'll say, yes, it is possible, but no, it's not trivial to kind of get this working in Node right now. You can use your console. So right now we're using alerts. Let me give you one more kind of, not tip here, but just a thing. You can do console logs here still. So you guys are probably all familiar with console log, which we use to write things to the terminal. What if I change all my alerts to console log? Now let's go back here. Okay, so let's refresh this page. So notice we get a prompt here. Console log is still doing something for your browser, but it's kind of hidden. So if you, for a Mac, again, you can do this in your on Windows also, but for a Mac, you hit Command Option I. That's going to bring up this developer panel right here. And there's a console here. So here is where you should be able to see all your console logs. So I have a console log, "Hey kid." Let's actually start this again. Refresh. So notice I have "Hey kid" in my console right here. So anything you do with console log, it's kind of sent to this hidden panel in your browser. So it is still viewable. So if I write a response here, let's say caps lock, it doesn't work right, hello. Notice we get a response here. So if you don't want to have the alerts, they get annoying, you can put them down here. For the input though, there's no console way, as far as I know, to have input. You can type here, but you can't submit input to your application through the console. Okay, so that's just like another way you could use console log with your browser. Okay, so I think that completes our challenge. I think we spent some good time on it. So let's actually go through the steps of committing this back to my GitHub. So I'm going to call on a few more students here. Grants, can you tell me, all right, I got the solution working. I think I've solved it. What are the next steps I should do to get this committed back to GitHub?
So now you need to, let's see, you're going to need to get it committed. So you need to I forgot what the terminology was, but you like the photocopier thing, put it in the next segment, and then you're going to commit it.
Yep, so we want to use Git Add. And again, the period just says any modifications from your project, edit. In this case, you only have one file. You could also specify the file you want to add. So let's say you change multiple files, but you only want to commit one of them. You can type the file name, add just the changes for that file. So again, you can be as granular as you want, but again, most of the time I just use Git Add period because I'm not trying to selectively add things to my Git project. So I do Git Add, and I do, what's the next step? Let's go with soup dev. Here's some audio, but I can't quite make out words there. All right, I'm going to assume soup dev was saying you want to do a Git commit. With a nice message.
With the -m in the message.
I can hear you. Yep. Okay. So solved def grandma in JavaScript. That'll be my commit message. And then what's the next step, soup dev? I think we have more audio issues.
Git push origin.
Yep. Git push origin. So this will push it back to your personal GitHub. So Notice it gives you some details about it. But if I go back to my GitHub, where was that right here? If I refresh this page, I should see the timestamps updated for, yep, 28 seconds ago. That seems like when I committed it. Notice that the other files have not been modified. So def grandma Python file 4 years ago is when we, I think, created this challenge probably. So 28 seconds ago, def grandma, again, I could view, if I want to view the history, go here, check out my commit. Yep, these are all the things I added. That looks like what I wanted. Okay, cool. So the last step is, Jake, what's the last thing I need to do to kind of like submit this to the instructors?
You have to do a pull request.
Yep. So there's a tab up here next to the code tab. There should be a pull request tab in your GitHub. When I click pull request, new pull request, create pull request. So a lot of buttons to click. And then here again, we highly encourage you to just put your name in there so we know who did what. I'm gonna do Conquer's instructor solution. All right, so this tells me what problem I did, and then I'm gonna have my name on here. So I'm gonna hit create pull request. A lot of button clicks here, but hopefully you guys can bear with it. It's gonna check some things, and then, all right, cool. Once you get that check mark, that means it's kind of submitted to us. So if I go to the pull request tab, you know, I see there's been 26 pull requests in here. So it looks like a lot of you guys completed this challenge and sent it to us. So that's great. But yeah, if you, let's say you struggle with this challenge and weren't able to complete it, you can go back to the algo def grandma on Quebec Platoon, go to the pull request tab and check out my solution. Or let's say, you know, you think, you know, Philip probably had a really cool solution. You could check out his code by checking out his pull request. Right. So again, you have access to submissions here. We'll try to post our instructor solutions here so that you, if you need a reference, whether you struggle with it or just want to see a different solution, the code should be available through this pull request. So if I click on that, I can go to my GitHub, and then you have access to what I just submitted. All right, cool. So that was Def Grandma Challenge. That was a great introductory challenge there. So I have 9:55 here. Let's definitely earned a break here. So let's take a 10-minute break. Please be back at 10:05 Central Time, and we're gonna tackle our next challenge, which was 99 bottles. All right, see you guys in a bit.